Chapter 3 The subjectivity principle. All the mighty world of I and dear, both what they have create, and what perceive. Wordsworth. Nabi. We must begin with the most basic of all principles, that governing what we see and do, and this is in the very act of perceiving reality, which I liken to the act of painting. We are the artists of our lives. We mix the colors, draw the lines, fix the focus, and achieve the artistic balance. Reality disciplines our painting, of course, it is our starting point. As the artist, we add here, leave out there, substitute color, simplify, and provide this reality with a point, a theme, and a center of interest. We produce 1,000 such paintings every moment. With the unconscious artistry, each is a personal statement, each is individualistic. The subjectivity principle is perception is subjective. 3 elements define the subjectivity: perception, mental field balance. Perception is what we hear, see, taste, smell, and feel, touch. Now, most people realize that their perception of things can be wrong, that they may be mistaken. We all have had disagreements with others on what we saw or heard. And we have heard of witnesses to a crime or accident who disagree wildly over the facts. Some teachers who wish to dramatically illustrate such disagreement have staged mock fights or hold-ups in a classroom. In one form of the exercise, a masked man rushes in, points a weapon at the teacher, demands his wallet, and then flees with it, leaving the class stunned. Afterwards, each member of the class is asked to write down what he saw and heard. Their accounts usually differ noticeably. But, of course, this is an example of a rapidly unfolding situation in which careful observation is difficult. Surely, one might believe that if there were enough time to study a given situation or event, then witnesses would all perceive it the same way. This is an easy enough hypothesis to test. Ask any 2 people to describe in writing a particular furnished room, or a car. Then compare. We would find many similarities, but we would also find some important and interesting differences. Sometimes such differences result from error, or from inattentiveness. However, there is something more fundamental at work in such an exercise. Even attentive observers often see things differently. And, most interesting of all, each observer can be correct. First, consider that each observer has a different vantage point from all the others, and their visual perspectives will differ accordingly. A cylinder viewed from above appears round and flat, but from the side it appears as a rectangle slightly rounded at the top and bottom, while if viewed from an angle it appears as the cylinder that it is. In ordinary, everyday life with our fellows, these differing vantage points are of little account, but their potential significance can be readily understood by any fan of active, contact sports such as football or basketball. Suppose that, during play, 2 players come together, and one of them falls to the ground. From the referee's line of sight, no foul is committed, while the spectators, especially the television audiences who see multiple angles and instant replays, see an obvious violation. Referee and audience both call the incident as they see it, and they may see different things from their different vantage points. But there is more to the subjectivity of perception than this. After all, people can change or, at least, compare their respective vantage points. There is a second, more fundamental reason for differing perceptions, and that is that, as human beings, we all endow what we sense with meaning. Thus, what we perceive becomes good or bad, repulsive or attractive, dangerous or safe. We may see a man running toward us with a knife as dangerous, a calm lake as peaceful, a child murderer as bad, a contribution to charity as good. Cultures are systems of meanings laid unto reality. To become acculturated is to learn the language through which a culture gives the world unique shape and evaluation. A clear example of this is a cross, which to a Christian signifies the death of Jesus for mankind as well as the whole complex of values and beliefs bound up in the Christian religion. Yet, to non-Christian cultures a cross may be meaningless, simply 2 pieces of wood connected at right angles. As another example, consider this quotation: "The filet mignon was seared on both sides by a charcoal fire and then with the warm juices trapped inside cooked medium rare. A small slice along the top with a knife revealed the pink interior, with red juice oozing around the knife." The first piece melted in my mouth. Physically, these words are just a series of lines on paper, with little intrinsic power to be perceived. Only lines, unless you can read English. To test this, just turn this book upside down. The words simply become lines, without meaning. Now, turn the book right side up again. The lines disappear, and meanings and images fill your mind. We have learned to unconsciously associate words with meaning. English readers, reading the above words, would inwardly perceive cooking a delicious steak. Our reading words and perceiving steak, what was done to it, and perhaps salivating, is similar to our reading other aspects of the outside world and perceiving money, another status, irritation, inviting eyes, a slippery road, a running dog. Besides varying perspectives and meanings values, a third reason for differing perceptions is that people have unique experiences and learning capacities, even when they share the same culture. People have their own background. No two people learn alike. Moreover, people have different occupations, and each occupation emphasizes and ignores different aspects of reality. Simply by virtue of their separate occupational interests, a philosopher, priest, engineer, union worker, or lawyer will perceive the world dissimilarly. Two people may physically see the same thing from the same perspective, therefore, but each through their different languages, evaluations, experience, and occupations, may perceive it differently and endow it with their own personal meaning. Dissimilar perspective, meaning, and experience are enough to explain why our perception will often differ radically from others. There is yet an even more basic reason for differing perceptions, however. What we sense is unconsciously transformed within our mental field in order to maintain our psychological balance. This mental process is familiar. People often perceive what they want to perceive, what they ardently hope to see. Their minds go to great pains to extract from the world that which they project onto it. People tend to see things consistent with their beliefs. If we believe businessmen, politicians, or bureaucrats are bad, we will tend to see their failings. If we like a person, we tend to see the good, hate him, and we tend to see the worst. Some people are natural optimists, always seeing sunshine. Others are pessimists, forever seeing storm clouds instead. Our perception is thus the result of a complex transformation of amorphous sensory stimuli. I can describe this process of perception to show its importance to interpersonal conflict and cooperation, and ultimately to people being free. Consider that things outside our mental field have different powers to make us perceive them. I like to use the examples of a thunderclap, a screaming baby, and a dripping faucet late at night. Each has a different degree of strength, but for most of us, each has the power to force itself on our perception. Even when we are busily occupied with something of great interest, a thunderclap, or an earthquake, or smell of fire, or a scream, will break through, making us perceive it. However, the rustlings of leaves, a humming in the background, or a low, monotonous voice, are weak forces bearing upon us. We may have to reach out to hear them. Concentrate on something else and we no longer perceive them. Independent of the outside world's powers to force our perception, we have power to impose a perception on reality. We can hallucinate. We can magnify some things such that we perceive them in spite of what else is happening. Think of the whisper of one's name in a crowded room, a famous person joining a noisy party, or one's child crying when there is a thunderous storm outside. What we perceive in reality is a balance between these two sets of powers, one the outside world's power to force us to perceive specific things, and the second our power to impose a certain perception on the world. This is the most basic opposition, the most basic conflict. Its outcome is what we perceive reality to be. The elements of the subjectivity principle, then, are perception, mental field, and balance. To illustrate them, assume that your mental field is surrounded by a flexible perceptual envelope separating your inner psychic processes and forces, the conscious doing perceiving you, from external things, as shown in Figure 3.1. The powers of the outside world are forces bearing on your field, and are met by your own powers to ignore, magnify, or alter them. The balance between reality's inner-directed and your outer-directed powers are the perceptual envelopes surrounding your mental field. Figure 3.1 illustrates what some of these outer powers might be on an hypothetical moment, say 8:43 p.m., June 21, 2006, while you are watching television. The size of the arrows corresponds to the relative powers of things to be perceived and your tendency to see them in a certain way or to ignore them. If the television program is uninteresting, you may be distracted easily, especially by the muggy, summer heat, or your noisy children. However, were you completely absorbed in the program, then you would perceive nothing else, not even your child walking into the room, or the sound of a noisy motorcycle going by your house. Your mental field might look like that in Figure 3.2. This balance of our mental field changes with our interest and concentration. Its shape and extension will depend on our personality and experience. And, of course, our culture. No wonder, then, that we are likely to perceive things differently from each other. Our perception is subjective and personal. Reality does not draw its picture on a clean slate on our minds. Nor are our minds a passive movie screen on which sensory stimuli impact, to create a moving picture of the world. Rather, our minds are an active agent of perception, creating and transforming reality, while at the same time being disciplined and sometimes dominated by it. What I have said so far can lead to several kinds of misunderstanding that I will attempt to resolve. Misunderstanding 1. There is no real truth, reality is relative. To say, as I do, that perception is subjective is not to deny that we can have true perception. Through trial and error, we can converge on a reality sufficiently true for us to survive and prosper. Consider that we cannot long survive driving a car unless we have a reliable perception of the road, other cars, driving conditions, and the like. Science is the best method humanity has developed for distilling truth from our subjectivity, and there is no doubt that this truth has been sufficiently precise to aid us in understanding and coping with our environment. Misunderstanding 2. We only perceive what we want to perceive. While we do tend to perceive things consistent with our desires and beliefs, for the normal person this tendency is limited by what in fact exists. While we may tend to see a girl we do not like as hostile or negative, we will still perceive the specific girl, what she is wearing, doing, saying. Nor will we perceive her if she is not there, unless our senses have been distorted by drugs or alcohol. To understand perception as subjective is to comprehend that we color, select, and differentiate the world through our mental field, not that we generally create a wholly original world of our own. Misunderstanding 3. There is one true perception. Two people may perceive reality differently and both may be right. They are simply viewing the same thing from different perspectives and each may be emphasizing a different aspect. Blind men feeling different parts of an elephant may each believe they are correct and the others wrong about their perception. Yet, all can be correct, all can have a different part of the truth. Misunderstanding 4. If there is agreement on the physical facts of an event or object, perceptions will agree. Here is a source of much confusion about perception and its subjectivity. A developer and an environmentalist can agree on the physical facts of a bulldozer, but to each the machine will have also intense and opposing complexes of meaning, making their perceptions of it different in quality. To the developer, it is a valuable and indispensable tool for clearing land on which to build. To the environmentalist, it is a destroyer of trees, foliage, and the natural lay of the land, an evil instrument of capitalist greed. Another example is that of two white policemen arresting a black person for robbing a white-owned store in a black neighborhood. The police, bystanders, and store owner may all agree on the facts. Black enters store with a gun, demands money, and is distracted and clubbed by store owner, and then restrained until the police arrive. But, although all may agree on these facts, white and black bystanders may perceive this event differently. Whites may perceive a robber being arrested. Blacks may perceive white domination again being exercised against blacks. The problem here is that there are two aspects of a sensory fact, its physical nature, with which natural science has been most concerned and about which people can most easily establish agreement, and its endowed meaning. Now, meaning is a matter of culture, ideology, and personal experience. Among Americans in a committee meeting, a participant who pleasantly questions the chairman, disagrees with the others, and presents his own views may well be seen as independent-minded and making a contribution. Among Japanese, such a participant might be perceived as rude and destructive of consensus. A Republican might see a new government regulation about what should be on food labels as another unnecessary intervention in business. A Democrat may see this as a compassionate attempt to help people make decisions about buying and eating food. Misunderstanding 5. We are the victims of our perception. This is the belief that we cannot help what we perceive and therefore cannot be blamed if we act on it. That is, we cannot censure a Marxist, communist, for his view of the world, or a Catholic, or a Frenchman. I disagree. To point out the subjectivity of perception is not to excuse one for allowing a particular perspective to dominate. The best test of one's perception is checking the facts, comparing meanings, and keeping an open mind on the possibility of misperception. And the most important corrective to being a victim of perception is that we realize its subjectivity, our tendency to see things our way. This helps avoid a belief in one's infallibility, a disease of the mind intrinsic to many political movements and religions.